Hi everyone. I'm Anna from GreenGeeks, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Beyond the Buzzwords, AI for Web Managers by Keanan Koppenhaver, founder of Floorboard AI. So we're really excited to have you back, Keanan. And real quick, I want to say a couple of words for those of you who are tuning in and maybe are not familiar with GreenGeeks. We are a 300% green energy web hosting provider, which essentially means we put back 3 times the amount of energy we consume into the grid in the form of renewable energy. We have been recognized by the US EPA since 2009 as a Green Power Partner, and we offer share hosting, reseller hosting, VPS, and dedicated server. We also plant a tree for every hosting account we provision, and we just reached a milestone of 50,000 trees through our partnership with global reforestation nonprofit One Tree Planted. So moving on to a couple of housekeeping items. If you come up with a question during the presentation, please put it in the Q&A so Keanan can answer them at the end of his presentation. You can chat in the chat room as you've been doing since the beginning, but remember to select everyone if you want everybody to see what you're talking about. And then finally, we are recording this session. So if you have to step away or you have another meeting, so don't worry because we'll be sending the recording in the next couple of days. And one more thing, we have enabled live transcription. So you have the ability to enable them during the webinar by clicking on the show captions icon. So now that's out of the way, I'm going to introduce our team here from GreenGeeks today, Erica Barbosa, who will be assisting us with the chat and the Q&A. So welcome, Erica. Do you want to say something, introduce yourself?
Thank you, Anna. I am Erica Barbosa. I am from Costa Rica. I work in the partners team at GreenGeeks, and today I'm going to be assisting the chat. Hope enjoy today with Keanan, and thank you for being here.
Thanks. I'm going to say a few words about Keanan. Keanan is a longtime developer and is passionate about helping agency owners and freelancers level up in their careers and development knowledge. Most recently, he started Floorboard AI, where he helps agency owners learn about AI and leverage it in their businesses so to make themselves and their team more efficient and able to deliver even higher quality work for their clients. So, Keanan, welcome again. Would you like to say hi and start your presentation?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Anna. Good to see you and Erica again. It's good to be back with y'all. I think this is my third presentation here, so always happy to be back.
Yeah.
So let's get going and dive in. All right. So like Anna mentioned, we're going to be kind of going beyond the buzzwords today. I know there's a lot of kind of swirling around the AI world, that all these new terms and things that are confusing, and there's a lot to learn. But what we're going to do today is pretty practically for folks who have to manage and maintain websites, break down how some of these AI technologies work, and more importantly, like where you can start to apply them. So for me, like the theoretical stuff is cool, but what's more interesting to me is where these tools can be applied and how they can actually be used to help me and people that I work with become more productive and able to spend more time doing the things we enjoy and outsource kind of the things we don't to these AI tools. So AI, as we kind of know it today, is what people refer to when they say AI is really a type of AI called a large language model. This is what tools like ChatGPT and others are based on. And what was really cool was when these were invented and became kind of more useful in the public, is they kind of brought automation potential to a whole new, entirely a new class of problems. So before, there were things that you could automate with code or some of the automation tools that were out there, but anything that dealt with natural language or kind of the fuzziness of the real world became a little bit more difficult. But with the advent of large language models, it became a lot easier. And so these problems that these models are good at are usually language based, right? And if anyone has tried to automate any sort of natural language tool with code, you run into a lot of like regular expressions and things that just get really complicated and break pretty easily. The kind of things you can automate with these tools also require you to be able to describe what success looks like, but you can be pretty vague, as we'll see in a little bit. When you're trying to automate with code or something more rigid, you have to be very specific about what input the system can expect and what your output needs to be. You can't really say things like, oh, it should sound like this. You have to say it needs to be 3 sentences, 500 words, etc. And kind of tying into that, large language models enable us to have lots of flexibility around our inputs and outputs. They don't really care if you feed it one paragraph or 10. You can ask it for, a single sentence output. You can ask it for output in a certain style, all sorts of different things that are just really hard to do if you're working in code or some of the previous types of automation platforms that we had. And it turns out like these 3 bullet points that we just saw are the shape of a lot of kind of web management and web maintenance problems. If you've maintained websites before, you know that sometimes the requests that come in are vague, even though you know kind of what sort of output you need and what sort of solution you need. And there's a lot of kind of fuzzy inputs and outputs. So a lot of these problems that people who maintain and manage websites deal with maps pretty closely to what large language models and AI are good at. So that's what we're going to look at today. And yeah, just as a quick intro, my name's Keanan. I've been working in the WordPress space a long time, specifically either working in agencies or helping run agencies. And I've worked with everybody from small local grocery stores, building websites for them, all the way up to companies like Rolling Stone and organizations like NASA, helping them with some of their web builds as well. So I kind of go across the whole spectrum of web builds, and I know what a lot of y'all are going through. And like Anna mentioned, I currently help freelancers and agency folks who are interested in AI and want to adopt it in their business through Flowboard AI. So I know some of you may be kind of scribbling notes down or taking screenshots of slides, and that's great. But what I try to do when I do these talks is to give people one URL. So if you want a copy of these slides, you can go to this URL right here. This is the slide to screenshot if you want to keep track of that. But then hopefully that'll free you up to kind of focus on the presentation for the rest of the talk. So I'll leave this up for a couple more seconds, but this is where you want to go if you want to get these slides and kind of study at home afterwards. Cool. So I just want to kind of preface this by saying that all of these new tools that have come out, they're super powerful tools, and using them a lot of times can feel kind of like magic. But I do want to reiterate that they are far from perfect. I'm sure you've seen a news article or 10 where a company just kind of started using AI for something and didn't really keep a very close eye on it. And then it came out in the news like, oh, they were like spreading all this false information, or it's having a really sort of bad outcome. And I think like you need to hold those two things at the same time, that these tools are very powerful, but they are far from perfect. They're getting better every day, but they're still far from perfect. And so my kind of core piece of advice to everyone in this talk is, use them to make you more efficient. Don't use them to like entirely replace you or things that you are doing, because that's a recipe for a little bit of hardship probably. So we're going to look at some concrete ways to do that. But even though these tools are great, they're not going to solve everything for you, and they still require kind of a back and forth of you plus the tool. So that's just something to keep in mind as we go forward. All right. So if you've read the description of this talk, you kind of know what we're going to demo today a little bit. But like I said, I want to keep this a little less theoretical and a lot more practical of what we're going to talk through. So we're going to go through 3 kind of scenarios of encounters that you might have as someone who maintains websites or is managing websites. First, we're going to look at if you're pulling kind of performance reports for your clients on how their websites are performing in terms of speed and efficiency. That's a lot of data to dig through. And so we're going to look at how some of the AI tools that are out there can help you with that. Secondly, if you've ever run across a bug on a website and you can't really understand the error message or don't know where to start with debugging that for a client, we're going to look at some opportunities for how to make that a little bit easier. And then finally, on the content side, we're going to look at how to get ideas for creating content for your clients, and to get help actually creating that sort of content for them if you're in more of a content management role for some of your clients. So hopefully the kind of 3 different buckets of those will cover a wide range of what y'all will do. And whether you have these exact things that you want to work on, or they can inspire you to use these tools in a different way in your business. I hope you come away from today with kind of interest and desire to take action on some of these things. All right. So challenge number 1, and this is a request that I used to get all the time, was clients want to know how their websites are doing. So they launch a website, they get a report from some people that like it kind of seems a little slow, or this page doesn't quite load as they would expect. And so they want kind of a running update on how things are going. And something really powerful that you can do as someone who maintains websites for clients is just kind of proactively on a monthly basis say, hey, here's kind of your website performance report, and this month we fixed these 5 things, and so you can see this number here got better. But those reports are a little bit difficult to put together. They're kind of tedious to go through. To see the changes from month to month, you have to kind of manually review a lot of the data. And so the place most people start with this is Google's Lighthouse, right? And so this is just a random report from the YouTube homepage. of Google's Lighthouse report. And so you can see there are multiple different categories of, performance, and across the top there's some other rankings there. And these are the big numbers that both clients focus on and sites like Google focus on to tell how well a website is performing in terms of its actual like technical, speed, et cetera, all these metrics that they care about. So you can run this report at any time. But really there are a lot of statistics here, and it's sometimes difficult to understand, what's important, what you should really focus on. And, Google tries to help you by further down this page, kind of breaking down, here are the things that you can do to, improve these numbers. But as you can see, there are a lot of things here. And if you expanded those little arrows, there'd be even more information to kind of click into and see what's going on. So this can definitely be overwhelming. And as a general theme, whenever you have a large amount of like unstructured data that you need to kind of add some structure to, that's where AI can be really useful. So large language models can actually help you sort through quite a bit of this information. And we're going to look at how that works. So basically, when you are running your Lighthouse reports, you can export those as JSON, which is basically just a flat text file of all of that data that was displayed visually, just displayed as text. You can upload that to your favorite large language model, and then you can do things like ask questions about it and get answers back. So you can say, well, okay, what's the most important of these problems that we need to fix like this month? And you can kind of go back and forth and say like, okay, well, how will we do that? And how does that work? And even better, you can do this kind of export, upload, and questions month over month. And so you can basically build up a sort of repository of all your past reports. And then the large language model will be able to answer questions like, well, what are the metrics that got better from 6 months ago, right? So you can bring those sorts of pieces of information to your clients where that previously would have been a hugely manual process. So let's take a look at how that works using a tool called Claude. So if you've used a tool like ChatGPT before, this will be very similar. It's called Claude. It's by a company called Anthropic. And just like you would expect with an AI chat interface, the main window is kind of this standard sort of what do you want to know? You can pick your language model if you want. You can add some configuration stuff, but the kind of just chat interface you expect. The one thing we're going to look at today is a tool that they have called Claude Projects. And what projects are, you can see I've already set up a project here for this demo. Projects are basically a kind of self-contained version of Claude where you can not only add specific instructions to guide the language model and what you're trying to get it to do, but you can also add knowledge. So in this case, our instructions might be, you are a web performance expert who excels in giving guidance to make websites load faster and perform better based on Lighthouse scores. And so what this does is basically now every time you create a new chat over here, it will use this project knowledge to give the large language model a little bit more context about what you're asking. The second thing that's useful here is this project knowledge. And so you can see that I've already uploaded one of our Lighthouse reports that I ran that produced that screenshot earlier as project knowledge. And so that means all of the issues that we saw on the previous screen, everything like that, and all of the actual numbers behind that are in this large language model's knowledge base for this project now, which means I can do things like say, what was the most important metric to fix from the most recent Lighthouse report? I can ask things like that. And it knows that when I say the most recent Lighthouse report, it should go into its project knowledge and access that report that's in there. And so it basically scans through that entire file, looks for kind of the relevant pieces, pulls them out, and should be able to answer this question. And so that project knowledge is really where you can sort of stack those reports over time. Each model has a limit as to how much data they can ingest that way, but that's a place where you can put that information and then have this project always ready to go to answer those questions. And so you can see here, it says, looking at the Lighthouse data, our largest contentful paint score was 0 out of 100. It took 15 seconds for the largest element on that YouTube homepage to paint, which is, Google's recommended 2.5 seconds. It's much, much higher than that. And so you can see that it identified that the element that was taking so long to load was a video thumbnail. And, it has all these different issues, right? And so at this point, we can kind of branch this conversation off in multiple ways. It says here are some other metrics that need improvement. And so we could ask it, for example, like, okay, if you've identified this issue, how would we go about fixing the least contentful paint issue? And so this is where it relies on, things it has learned from the internet to, tell us how to actually fix this. And so it mixes things that are in its training data and in its knowledge base already with things that we've taught it, like it knows that this specific image URL is the one that was causing the issue. And so it's able to make specific recommendations, like we can size the image appropriately, or we can add height and width attributes, or we can do things like preloading. So all of these kind of performance tips and tricks that you could easily search for in Google or find on the internet. But what I really like about using a language model in this way is that it makes it specific to your situation. So whereas you could go read 5 different tutorials that are very like generic, this kind of thing that we've configured here knows everything about kind of the problems that we are specifically dealing with, and is able to tailor that generic advice to us specifically. So what I recommend when kind of using these projects is you can set up, a different project for each one of your clients and give that project the knowledge of what the project is, what the website is, kind of any kind of client specific knowledge you feel is relevant. And then we can also put like things like these Lighthouse reports in there as well. And so it kind of becomes your own sort of personal assistant for each specific project because it has much more specific knowledge of the client project that you're dealing with. So you can see like this answer is very detailed here. But the cool thing is we can just kind of chat back and forth with it and dive into any of the aspects that we want more clarity on. And so instead of, like I said, a generic tutorial that we would find on Google, we're basically having this write us our own tutorial in real time based on actual data that knows about the project that we're working on. So that's pretty cool. All right. So the second thing is, I'm sure anyone who's deployed any website to the internet anywhere at some point, unless you're a much better developer than me, has encountered an error right on their website. And if it looks familiar, we'll take a look at one in a second. But ChatGPT and some of these other large language models, they're actually pretty good at helping with errors. Specifically, if you deal with WordPress, because all of WordPress's code is open source. There's been a ton written on the internet about WordPress errors. Stack Overflow has a ton of topics on WordPress errors, and all of that data was used to train these AI models. And so it knows a lot about sort of errors that y'all might encounter. But again, it knows about those in the abstract and not necessarily specific to your situation. And so more context in these cases is always better. So we can actually look over here. I have a WordPress site with an error. And if I just take this error message that I have here and I go and paste it into Claude, we can see what it says. I probably should have asked it an actual question of like, can you help me debug this error? But it's able to figure out, okay, it's occurring in your local development environment. There's a function that can't be found. So, it's asking me, it's telling me what's going on, and it's saying like, it's giving me some generic steps to check, right? Like much like you might get from, if you, message your web host or somebody and say, hey, my site's broken, here's the problem. This is the kind of advice they're going to be able to give you, right? Because they don't know exactly about your specific setup and what's going on and all that stuff. And so this is the kind of thing we could find in a tutorial on the internet or from somebody who doesn't know exactly what's going on with our site. But in the spirit of more context is always better, we can actually get quite a bit closer to having a good answer and solution for this type of problem using a slightly different tool. So in this case, that tool we're going to use is called Cursor. So this is a code editor. This is a fork of Microsoft's VS Code. And so if any of y'all have used a code editor before, this sort of interface will look very familiar to you. On the far left, we have the list of files that are in this case, the plugin that we're looking at. In the middle is actually where we edit our code. And this new thing on the right is our new kind of cursor specific functionality. So it includes a sort of AI chat sidebar where you can do the sort of chatting we've been doing with Claude directly inside your code editor. And the benefit of that is that it knows about your code specifically. So that's really nice to be able to ask things about your specific code. Just like before, we were able to give it our specific Lighthouse report. Now we can have Cursor help us investigate our specific code. And so, again, we have this error in our code somewhere. And, as I'm looking through, it's not really obvious where this error is. It's pointing me to a lot of like WordPress core files, which I don't think is actually where the error is, but those are all like the files that I see listed here in the stack trace. So we need to kind of dive in and see what's actually going on here. So let's take a look at how Cursor works. So we've got our 2024 theme opening Cursor here. And I'll zoom in just a little bit so you can see, hopefully. And what we're going to do is just, again, the same thing we did with Claude. We're going to take our fatal error and we're going to paste it into the AI chat in Cursor. And you'll see it's actually calling the Claude model under the hood. I can choose different models here, but I'm going to stick with this one for now. And so, doing this is not really much different than what we just did over in the browser, because we're not giving it any additional context for what's going on. And so again, it's able to give us kind of the same answer. We're like, check your functions file. Usually happens when these things are happening. And so it's able to give us that sort of output there. But the cool thing about Cursor is that now that we know we should be checking our functions file, we can actually, in the chat here, specifically mention our functions file by just saying @functions PHP. And then if we paste the same error message again, now it knows to use that file specifically, and it's able to actually see our specific error. So it says in functions.php, our function definition has a typo. There's this WEF after, and it really should just be called 2024 block styles. And in addition to identifying our specific error, it's also able to provide this suggested solution, right? So what we can do is, we can read some more of the explanation here, but we can also just go ahead and click this apply button. And what that does is it opens up our functions file and says, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to remove this line in red, and I'm going to replace it with this line in green. If you've ever seen like a git diff, like this format should look familiar to you. But I can also just go ahead and click on accept, and then it will make that change for me. And so if I hit save and I go back over here, we see that, now our homepage is loading. So that was Cursor able to basically go through, look at our files and see what's going on, and help us debug that error much more quickly than, a sort of generic tutorial or anything like that, because it has the specific context of our code base. So we can, at any point, if we wanted to ask, we're looking at our functions file here. But if you wanted an explanation, for example, of like, how does the 404.html template work? You could do the same thing. You could @mention 404.html, and you could say, how does this file include as a template part? And it would use, all the knowledge that is in its training data, as well as the knowledge it could read from your file. And it basically is able to break down that question for you. And provide, kind of like one-off specific to you documentation. And so it mentions that, this is part of full site editing. And so you can continue to ask follow-up questions there if you want to. But it's basically able to inspect and read your code base and also write and update and make changes on your behalf, which is pretty cool, while still giving you kind of the visibility into what's going on and what it's doing. So challenge number 3, for some of you, maybe, you're less on the technical side, you're less on the make sure the website is up and running side and performing well. But maybe you are working on the behalf of your client to do social media posting, or to actually create and write blog posts on their site, et cetera, and figure out how all that works. And so we mentioned up at the very beginning that these are language models. And so these sort of language-based tasks are something that you would expect these models to be pretty good at. And it turns out they are. So in the past, language models used to be just kind of ask a question, get an answer. And that was helpful. And that was really cool back in the early days of like ChatGPT, because the answer could basically be anything. You could say, write me a poem in the style of this famous poet, or, talk like a pirate and answer this question, or ask sort of really esoteric questions that would have taken a long time to look up on the internet elsewhere. But the kind of back and forth of just question and answer became a little bit limiting when we wanted the models to be able to answer more complicated questions, and also have access to more resources and use those resources appropriately, right? So the concept then of what is known as a reasoning model was introduced. And a reasoning model kind of gets a little philosophical as to whether you believe these large language models are thinking or reasoning, or whether they're just, predicting the next word that comes in a sentence based on what they've been trained on. But reasoning models is what we've all kind of decided to call them. And basically how that works is, you have a large language model, like one of OpenAI's models or a Claude from Anthropic. And basically, instead of just coming up with an answer to the question that you've asked, it starts to kind of think about the problem and break it down step by step. And these models often have access to tools to do things like browse the web, or execute code or, you know, write markdown or things like that, things that the model can actually do other than just providing the user an answer. So sometimes the model will think about the question that you asked and decided that it needs to use one of these tools to get more information or, you know, be able to provide you a better answer. And so it's then able to do that, and it gets some sort of output from that tool. So if it searches the web, the output that it gets is a list of links that it was able to find by searching the web. And so then we kind of just loop back to the beginning, and the model says, great, now that I have the user's initial question plus this information that I got from the tool that I use, what's next? Do I have enough information to give the person back their answer, or do I need to, you know, call another tool and get more information to answer this question, right? So yeah, like this is obviously a little bit more complicated and a lot more of a step up than you might expect from like just a question and answer ChatGPT. But you know, it basically, these models can quote unquote think and use these tools to do what they need to do. And so let's actually take a look at how this works real quick. So what I'm going to do over here is bounce over to ChatGPT, and I have this prompt here. Basically, I'm looking for like content ideas for my site. I want it to know that like, here's what I post about on Twitter, what I used to post about on Twitter. Here's, you know, I want you to be able to look at my LinkedIn. And also I'm going to give you the existing sitemap for my site so you can see what I've already posted about, right? So we don't want like duplicate topics. And so instead of using the kind of default 4.0 model that ChatGPT gives you, if you click on the selector, you can see here that we have this 03 model. And this is one of the reasoning models that I was talking about. So you can see here, it says uses advanced reasoning. And so what's going to happen when we kick this off is that instead of, you know, just starting to spit out an answer like you might expect with ChatGPT normally, you're going to see this little thinking gradient come across. And once the model starts thinking, you're actually going to be able to see a little bit as to what is going on here. And so, you know, it says like, to avoid duplication, I'm going to check the sitemap. I'm going to check what is ranking well in Google already. And so you can see that it's looking through a bunch of various URLs. It's trying to find my sitemap in Google. So it seems like it had a problem reading this URL directly. But instead of getting stuck and saying, well, I can't do that for you, it's able to kind of think its way around the problem a little bit and make an additional effort to find things somewhere else. And so the cool thing about these tools is that they are basically able to make a lot of these decisions on their own. And so I didn't specify, for example, like, make sure you check each of these sources once and then return. Like, if I was doing this automation in code, that's what I would have to do. But basically, I'm just giving it the general shape of the problem and saying, you know, think through like what you can like understand for steps to solve this problem, and then go ahead and execute each of those. And so what's cool is we do get that transparency of, here's what it's doing, here's the resources it's searching for, and what's going on. The downside is, as you can see, like, these models take a lot longer to execute than your basic like ChatGPT request. And so in the end, though, we do get this output of some suggestions, right? And so you can see that it thought for 1 minute and 21 seconds. And you can actually expand this and go in here and look and see, okay, it searched the web for my domain name. It looked at the sitemap, and then it said it couldn't access my sitemap for some reason. But it mentioned that it found, you know, a GreenGeeks webinar that I had previously done. It looked for articles on my blog. It looked at my LinkedIn. It looked at my Twitter. And it started kind of brainstorming suggestions. And so it has this information here about like what it was already able to find. It's able to find patterns for like things I post about on social media. And basically then it's able to say, okay, here are some ideas, right? You should, you know, make these playbooks, or these are like ideas for video series, which are kind of cool. Interactive tools that you could put on your site. So it gives you a lot of ideas here. And what's cool is, again, because this is just a back and forth chat, I could, you know, at any point say, okay, cool, I like the Chicago agency AI breakfast idea. Like, can we like flesh out a plan for that? Or, you know, how many like people should be here? What sort of job titles would these people have? Like, how would I find those people on LinkedIn, et cetera? So you can dive really deep here. And it's even, you know, suggesting like, here's the first week of the month I should do this, second week I should do this, et cetera. And so it's pretty cool that, you know, not only was it able to kind of come up with these ideas, but actually this was sourced from real information on the internet that it was able to look up in real time. So these reasoning models are super powerful for tasks where you don't maybe even at the beginning have access to all the resources that you need to solve the problem, because they're able to go out and find things for you in addition to just being a very powerful language model. Cool. And so that's awesome. It's given me a lot of really cool ideas. But what about like when we're actually ready to write? And so that's where we need a slightly different tool. And large language models off the shelf aren't great at writing entire blog posts in one shot. When you ask them to output, 1,500 words of text that all flows in a super coherent style based on an outline, that's pretty hard for them to do. There's things that get weirdly messed up, and it's just not a great skill for ChatGPT or a Claude to have. And so that's where we need to reach for a slightly more specialized tool. And so one that I really like is this tool called lex.page. And for example, let's actually go take one of these ideas from our O3. Which do we... Cool. Let's look at prompt engineering cheat sheet for client-facing roles, right? So this is like how to write good AI prompts if you are a client-facing person. So this is basically just like if you've used Google Docs or Microsoft Word or anything like that, you're already familiar with how this works. It's just a text editor, and you can use it as purely a text editor. But there are a few different things that make this really powerful if you want to leverage AI. So for example, we can do Command K and we can see some of the things that we have available to us here. So, you can edit a paragraph, which is not really helpful yet because we don't have anything written. We can run checks, which are things like grammar checks, checks for brevity, cliches, all these different things. You can even build your own if you have a certain style guide you like. And again, just like Cursor, we have the same chat here. So let's see what it thinks for an outline here. So based on the title, create an outline for this piece. And what I like about this versus using a tool like ChatGPT or Claude is that since it lives right inside your editor, there's a lot less sort of copy and pasting between windows. We do have to kind of copy this out of the chat, but what we can do is basically put this in here then. And now if we close the chat, we then have a sort of writing interface that we can use, right? So we could write, a paragraph on fundamentals of prompt engineering. And then we could, highlight this and use our same Command K of like, okay, like let's, edit this to make it a little more conversational, or run a check to make sure we're not using cliches in this paragraph, etc. And what's also something that I really like here is just like you would tag, a coworker in a Google Docs comment, you can also tag Lex in your Google Docs comment and say, Lex, please evaluate this or provide me with some alternate headings for this section, etc. And so for me, it really allows me to get into the flow of asking AI for help, kind of usually what I have is just like a bullet point list of ideas of things that I want to put in an article. And so I find it really helpful for me getting that bullet point list of ideas organized into an outline that I will go in and kind of flesh out all of the outline sections. But editing is something that I'm not the best at. And so asking it for help with where are kind of the weak points in the argument I'm trying to make, or is there anything that is kind of unclear from how I explain things, is super helpful to, give the things that I'm writing that extra, 5, 10, or 20% polish of like, this is really well done. Sometimes I'll ask it to take a more critical role of being like, okay, your job is to find all of the different holes that you could poke in this argument, or and kind of like what the comments on Hacker News or some negative internet site would say, and to walk me through that to end up making my piece quite a bit better. And so I really love like purpose-built tools like this that let you do what you need to do, but also kind of bring AI into the process. So if you are kind of creating content or doing any sort of writing like that, I would really recommend using a tool like this. I know Google Docs with Gemini is getting more of this sort of interface as well. It's getting much more integrated, but this is the one that I personally like and use, so would recommend it. So we demoed Lex. And that's kind of all I had in terms of prepared content. I wanted to, like I said, I wanted to give you all some practical examples, but when we do these, I also know that we have a ton of questions almost every time. And so wanted to leave some time for that as well. But happy to, take those, do some more demos if that would be helpful. Let's run through some of those.
Thank you. I do see a couple of questions here in the Q&A. From Ken, how much of what you're showing can be accessed and used with free LLMs versus paid subscriptions?
Yeah, good question. So ChatGPT and Claude, I believe, both have free plans that let you kind of do this chatting in the web browser sort of um, activity for free. I don't exactly know what the current limitations are on that. They change it quite a bit, but they do give you some amount of free usage because they do want folks to use these tools. The things that are somewhat limited sometimes are these like reasoning models, just because they're much more expensive for the OpenAI and whoever to run them. They sometimes limit what's available on the free plan there. So but definitely try it out. There you can jump into a lot of these things for free and kind of get started and see, what they're good at for the stuff that you're using them for, what they're not as good at. But yeah, even Cursor, for example, like this is a free editor that you can download. If you don't use the AI functionality, it's completely free. But even on the sort of free tier of their plan, they let you use some of the different models, and there's just limitations on how much or how often you can use them, obviously. So that's the biggest limitation here.
Yeah, makes sense. Let me see. I see other question from Ken. Well, actually, I think we just answered that. From Jorn, does Cloud work with visual audio?
Yeah, so you can, if you notice here, there's this little plus icon here. And so you can upload files, you can, connect it to repos from GitHub, you can connect it to files from Google Drive. And so there are a lot of different ways you can get different information in here. And that's something I use these models actually for quite a bit, is if I have a screenshot or something that I need to get text out of, I basically just upload it to either Claude or ChatGPT and say, hey, can you just like parse the text out of this screenshot for me? But actually, the other thing that I was able to do the other day is I was looking at an issue with something that was going on in my furnace downstairs. And I want to see if this will pull it. But basically what I was able to do is upload, some photos here that I just like took on my phone, and it was able to walk me through like, okay, here's what you're looking at. Here's, where you might want to be looking. And obviously this is a case where you need to confirm what the tools are telling you. Anything dealing with electricity and things like that, you don't want to just like blindly trust AI tooling for. But it was able to give me a place to start and investigate of like what could be the problem that I was looking at. And it was able to, obviously like look at this type of image and understand what was going on and tell me, where to look, how to debug this sort of thing. And so the models are constantly getting better at understanding multimedia sorts of inputs. So yeah, absolutely.
Makes sense. Let's see, Ken, do you find it helpful to compare results from multiple LLMs on the same prompt?
Yep, absolutely. That's something I always recommend, is that each model, again, kind of gets into the philosophy of how much you want to treat the models like a human, but each model does have its own sort of style of output. Some people call it a personality. And so you can prompt for that, but also just at its core, like each model works a little bit differently based on how it was trained and things like that. So for example, for a while, like Claude was the model that I used whenever I needed help with writing, because it was the best model for kind of mimicking my writing tone. And so that's the one that I used. ChatGPT has recently gotten quite a bit better at that. And so I find myself kind of bouncing back and forth a little bit between the two. But because there are always new models coming out and the models themselves are always getting a little bit tweaked, yeah, would highly recommend, especially if you're starting a new type of task, try it across all the models and see which one you feel has the best output. Um, and yeah, that's something I always recommend. Another tool that I can recommend here is this tool called LM Arena. And basically what this does is, if you don't want to spend time evaluating the models yourself, which again, I would recommend, this is basically a public leaderboard where you give two models a single prompt. Both models will respond to you, and then you pick which one is your favorite. You don't know what the models are that it's chosen, but basically what that results in is a sort of completely blind leaderboard about what people think is the best model, right? And so currently it looks like Gemini's model is up here. O3, which is the one we used just now, is number 2. And then the basic like ChatGPT model. And so these rankings are changing all the time. But the one thing I mentioned to folks when I show them this is that, again, this is the collective opinion of lots of people on the internet. It's not the specific opinion of how good a model is at solving your problem, right? So for something you're trying to do, like the DeepSeek model that's down here at number 7, right, might be the best just based on how it outputs. And so you only kind of find that out if you're experimenting a little bit. And obviously there are way too many models to try them all, but I would suggest at least trying between OpenAI, Claude, and Google's Gemini models to see what works best for you.
Okay, thank you. Let me see. There's a question from Jack about the carbon footprint of AI tools to create content for a website. We will have to get back to you on this question. And it's about GreenGeeks, so Keanan, you're not going to probably be able to answer that.
Sure. I mean, I will say it's an area where like there's a lot of research being done right now. And, obviously like everything we do on the internet is energy intensive, and that's what makes, the work that GreenGeeks does important. But yeah, it's still very much an open question of, what resources does this consume, and how does that compare to like a data center full of YouTube videos, for example, right? Like, is it the same? Is it more? Is it less? And so that's something that people are still actively trying to figure out.
Exactly. So let's see. Dina is asking, what image AI tools do you recommend?
Yeah, is that for like generating images? I guess probably. If not,
Yes,
feel free to jump back in the chat and respond. But yeah, I'm gonna take that as generating images. I will say that the newest model of ChatGPT, this 4.0 model, has gotten quite a bit better at doing image generation. For example, I mean, we can actually go back to this furnace example I was showing you. And before I even like went downstairs to look at the furnace, it basically generated me this sort of textbook looking diagram of what I might expect to see. And some things that these models have struggled with in the past is like the text placement, for example. Text was not able to print legibly, and even if it was legible, it wasn't in the correct place. And so this really impressed me that it was able to put all this text in the correct place, put these little lines between the text and the components that it was dealing with. So just out of the box, the image models of ChatGPT have gotten a lot better. The other tools that I have used in the past, the biggest one would be Midjourney. And this is basically, unlike ChatGPT, this is largely image focused. So you're not going to get generic sort of large language model responses out of Midjourney. It's all focused on generating images. But you just kind of scroll through here, you can see you can make everything from, looks like a very realistic image from like the 90s or early 2000s maybe, all the way to, things that are a little more imaginative, like embroidery or, 3D kind of animated style. So all these were generated in Midjourney. And what's cool about, browsing around on the homepage here is that if you click the image, it will actually show you the prompt that was used to make each of these. So that's what I kind of like to do sometimes, is I just like scroll through here and see like, okay, this is a cool one. It's like hyper realistic. And so how did this person get this prompt? You can just kind of scroll through and see all the different prompts that people are putting together, which is pretty cool. So yeah, by default, I would say I just use ChatGPT because the images are very good there. But if you're looking for another tool, I would also recommend Midjourney.
Midjourney. Thank you. And yes, Dina was referring to that.
Yep.
And then Vic is saying something about previous question from Bjorn. He was asking about Visual Studio. I'm going back to see, did I read it wrong, or does Claude works with Visual Studio?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure of the question, but yeah, visual. I mean, if we're talking about Cursor, which is the editor here, it is language agnostic. So just like any sort of code editor, it will work with any sort of language you would want to use here. So the nice thing about large language models is they do have broad knowledge of lots of different programming languages, and so yeah, you're not limited to just HTML or just PHP or just WordPress here.
Okay. TD is asking, is Cursor an app that is downloadable from the App Store or from their site, or is it web-based?
Yeah, it's a code editor that's downloadable from their site. So it's just cursor.com. You can download it here. There are other alternatives as well. So another one that has come up recently is Windsurf. Yeah. So this is again very similar to what we just looked at. It is a sort of AI enabled code editor. But yeah, these are just apps that you can download from the various websites, and you can Google for those.
Okay, great. Gary is asking, how does this tool help with SEO ranking, for instance, beyond buzzwords and keywords on, say, conventional search engines like Google and so on?
Sure. So I would say I think that's probably either talking about how we asked O3 to give us some content ideas, or how we were writing in Lex.page. And this is an example where I would say there are two ways of going about this. Number one, if you kind of already know the keywords that you want to target, you could include that in this initial prompt here. And like I said before, the more information you can give the language model before you ask it to do stuff for you, the better it is. I kind of think of it as, having a very smart friend who doesn't know anything about the specific problem that I'm working on. So if I'm able to give them a lot of information, or I'm going to talk to them for 5 minutes about here's what I've tried, here's what I want to do, they're going to be a lot better equipped to help me with my problem. And so this example here was very general. I just said, like, give me all of your ideas. And I didn't try to focus it at all. But if I had said, I want to write content around X, Y, and Z keywords, it would have tailored its output to that as well. And similarly, over here in Lex, something you could do is, after you have written a post, or even when you're asking for help creating an outline, etc., you could just mention that those are keywords you're trying to target. You could also create a custom check that basically says, given this keyword, how well is this article written for this keyword, etc. So those are a couple ways to kind of shape your content that way. But in terms of like actually helping with SEO ranking, there's not a ton that's done there. You have to publish your content, and then it gets ranked in Google, however Google chooses to rank it. But you can definitely use these tools to help kind of guide your process there if you have keywords in mind or things you're trying to target.
Yeah, makes sense. Dina is asking, what do you think of Copilot?
Yeah, I'm assuming we're talking about Microsoft Copilot here. There are a lot of things that have now been called Copilot. But yeah, I think what they're trying to
Yeah, she
do
said yes.
with basically something that's a lot more kind of broad, as far as I understand, than some of the specific tools that we've looked at. But I think it's nice how it integrates into, if you're on the Microsoft stack, it integrates into your apps and things. If you'll notice here, like, it looks very similar to ChatGPT. The difference is they don't specifically kind of tell you what models you're using here. So, but you can see, like, this is the same pattern we've noticed, where we have quick response, which are kind of the basic like models in ChatGPT, for example. But now that you know the term reasoning model, you can see that they're calling it think deeper here, but we can understand that they're probably using a reasoning model under the hood. And so yeah, I would say, I haven't used this a ton, but there's a lot of similarities here, and especially with the ways that it integrates with other kind of applications and things in the Microsoft stack. It seems like it's pretty powerful.
Yeah. Thank you. Andrea is asking, I'm curious about using AI to extract some actionable information from raw web logs. Any suggestions on that?
Yeah, I think that's a good use case. That kind of goes back to what we did at the beginning with the Lighthouse report. So if you actually look at the Lighthouse report, what it looks like is just this list of like things. This is all the JSON that we uploaded to Claude. And so this is like a lot to go through, but you can see, like, this kind of looks like, what a weblog might look like. And so what I would do is probably just, upload your text file of your logs to Claude and ask it about what you're trying to find out. So if you're trying to say, I've been hearing reports of increased 404s on my site. Can you give me all of the pages in this log, all the URLs that returned 404 at some point? and then it could just like condense that list down for you. Or you could say if you are dealing with kind of spam traffic or like bot attacks, you could upload your access logs and say, cool, here's all the access logs for the past day. Are there any patterns of like a specific IP address that's constantly hitting my site that I maybe need to block or things like that? So it's really good at parsing through all that content for you. And yeah, I would just recommend using it in that way. Upload the file, let it read through it, and then just ask, the same sorts of questions you would ask a systems engineer or a DevOps person who you gave those logs to, and they were looking through it manually. It'll just be a lot faster. Again, though, that's the thing where, especially if the logs are a lot of data, the more data you put in here, the more the systems start to what we call hallucinate, which is kind of make up information that it thinks sounds good, but maybe isn't accurate. The plus side of that is any of the recommendations it gives you or advice that it gives you, because you have the logs, you can check against the logs and say, like, is this accurate before you take action on it? So just a reminder to kind of keep the human in the loop a little bit there, and double check that information that it gives you once it's able to do that. But it's a really powerful tool for parsing through a ton of data like that. It would take a human a long time to do.
I like keep the human in the loop.
Yeah.
Greg is asking, does everyone use GPT as their base programming, or does anyone use something different? Does Apple has a form of Chat GPT?
Okay, two questions. Number one, does everyone use ChatGPT? No, I don't think so. For example, you'll notice that like I use kind of Claude as my go-to normally. I've heard really good things about Gemini, which is Google's version, getting a lot better recently. So that may be one that I try, but I'm constantly kind of just like experimenting and going back and forth. And like I mentioned, as you get a little bit more experienced, you might find that like different models are better at different things that you're trying to do. So for example, I might give all of my programming related questions to ChatGPT, whereas I would give all my writing related questions to Claude, right? So you can kind of, there's a little bit of nuance there. But the models are all constantly getting better. And so yeah, it's really just that kind of try them and see which one resonates with you the most. The second question was, does Apple have a version of ChatGPT? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, Apple has been a little bit slow to kind of join this party. They are rolling out something right now called Apple Intelligence that basically gives you access to these sorts of tools on your computer. The biggest thing that they are dealing with, in my opinion, and this is not any inside information that I have, but just looking at it from the outside, is that these models are able to run so fast because they're running on very specialized hardware in the cloud. And so there are large language models that you can run on your own computer without an internet connection. But they are much kind of smaller models that are designed for that. And so I think Apple is trying to go at it from a perspective of what is a good enough language model that we can put on someone's actual computer. And the models are still kind of catching up to being able to do that. So yeah, they do have Apple Intelligence. From my very limited experience with it, it's not very good at this point, but I'm sure it will only get better. But they don't have like a web URL that you can go to and use Apple's large language model like you can with Claude or with ChatGPT.
Yeah, thank you. I see some comments, and then Riyadh is asking, what about open source LLM?
Yeah, open source LLMs are kind of a touchy subject for some people, because what does it truly mean to be an open source LLM? To not get too deep into it, there's a debate around whether releasing the trained model without releasing how it was trained, which how it was trained is kind of companies like secret sauce a little bit. So no one really wants to release that. But the debate is then, is that model truly open source because, a person couldn't go and like retrain the model using the same methods. Whereas like, if you want to take the WordPress code base and like put it somewhere else and make your own thing on top of it, you absolutely could. Whereas you can't really do that with some of the open source models. But there absolutely are open source models that exist. One of the most prominent ones is Llama by Meta. And so this is, that they have kind of their own set of models that we haven't mentioned here. But you can, run these on sort of your own hardware if you want to. You can run them on GPUs that exist in the cloud. And they kind of have their mapping here of how they feel they compete with some of the other models. And so there are definitely open source models. I think the jury is still out on if they're truly open source. But basically, you can sort of like retrain these and modify them in a way that you can't modify, for example, the model that's underneath ChatGPT.
Yeah. Okay. Let me see what else. Ron is asking, do you subscribe to many of these tools or find that you can get by with the free versions?
Yeah, I do. I find that I'm using them quite a bit. And so both Claude and ChatGPT, I do subscribe to, so I can get also these, reasoning models for things, which is helpful. But yeah, I would say I wouldn't go out and like subscribe to 10 different tools today. I would say definitely start on the free versions. That's what I did. I started using the free version of ChatGPT and the free version of Claude. And then as I kind of felt it out and started to kind of reach some of the usage limits that were there, but then also ask more complicated questions and want access to better models and things. Yeah, like you can decide which you feel is useful and worthy of your subscription fee at that point.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's how I would go about it. But I do pay for at least a couple of these things. I used to pay for Midjourney. I don't anymore because I just use the chat here in ChatGPT. But Cursor, ChatGPT, and Claude, I do pay for. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I don't see any more question here in the Q&A. If I wanted to ask you, if someone wants to reach out to you, what's the best way to reach out to you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say, yeah, I'll put this back up. But yeah, Keanan@floorboardai.com is my email. I check that pretty frequently. Because my name is relatively unique. I've gotten this same K Koppenhaver social handle most everywhere. But yeah, I also need to update this link apparently. But
Yes.
but yeah, the Keanan@floorboardai via email is probably the best place to find me, or on LinkedIn.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much,
right.
y'all.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for staying for this webinar, and keep looking up for new webinars at greengeeks.com/webinars. Thank you again, Erica, for your help with managing the chat and the Q&A. And thank you, Keanan, as always. And we'll see you again, I'm sure.
All right, sounds good. Can't wait.
We'll have you again.
Thank you, Keanan, Inanna. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Thank you.